Hey guys, in this video we are talking about shocks. We're talking about things that shift the SRAS curve and things that shift the AD curve. Things that shift the SRAS curve are called supply shocks. We can have both positive and negative supply shocks. Positive supply shocks, they're going to cause SRAS to shift to the right. Negative supply shocks are going to cause SRAS to shift to the left. On demand, same thing. A negative demand shock, a little bit harder for me to do with my arm. That would be a negative demand shock like that. And then a positive demand shock would look like that, okay? So again, we're talking about shocks, things that shift the SRAS and the AD. Now, before I get going, I want you to understand we are at full employment output right now. What do I mean that we are at full employment output? Our intersection of our SRAS and AD, which is where we are at, okay? So the intersection of our SRAS and AD is right here at full employment output. So we've got YE equaling YF. That is called a long run equilibrium. When you're in that long run equilibrium, it's going to take a shock, okay? Something exogenous to cause us to move off of this long run equilibrium, okay? The economy is in equilibrium. The labor market's in equilibrium. The product market's in equilibrium. It's going to take a shock to move us off of this, and that's what this video is about. So let's get to it. Let's start off with our demand shocks, okay? The first thing to understand when you're trying to understand what's going to cause AD to shift is that it is best to think of AD as C, which is consumption, plus I, which is investment, plus government purchases, which is self-explanatory, plus net exports, exports minus imports. So what am I saying? AD is total spending, okay? AD, think of that as total spending, okay? There's four types of spending because there's four actors that spend money. Who are those four actors? Households, businesses, governments, and the rest of the world. Households, when they spend money, it's called consumption. When businesses spend money, that's called investment. When governments spend money, that's called government purchases. When the rest of the world spends money on our stuff, that's called exports. And when we spend money on the rest of the world stuff, that's of course called imports. Anyhow, we've got AD equaling C plus I plus GP plus NX. What are the things that are going to cause AD to change? Well, they would be things that cause consumption to change, that would cause household spending to change. And guys, it's not that hard to understand this. You don't have to memorize this as a list. The things I'm going to say are so common sense, okay? What would cause household spending in the aggregate to change, okay? Well, aggregate income, okay? The income of households. Of course, if households start making more income or less income, all right, that's going to change consumption. Now, what's important to understand here is two of the ways that we change income is through tax policy and transfer payments, okay? Taxes and transfer payments, they both change income, which of course changes consumption. And when I say taxes and transfer payments, you should be thinking fiscal policy. So we just got a big takeaway, all right? Fiscal policy shifts the AD curve predominantly, okay? Now, what else would change consumption? Well, yes, income, but also the wealth of households, okay? So the money flowing into households, that's income, but also the stock of wealth that they currently have, all right? When we're thinking about wealth, we should be thinking about what's happening in the stock market and what is happening in the housing market, okay? So something happens in the housing market or the stock market that affects household wealth. That's going to affect how much they spend. What else affects household spending? How they feel about the economy, okay? There's many ways to say what I'm about to say, but consumer confidence is our preferred way here at Econ Busters. But all that is you can say that's how they feel about their expected future disposable income, just how they feel about the economy. Yes, consumer confidence, how they feel about the economy in general. Do they think they're going to be able to keep their job if they lost their job? Do they think they could be able to find a job with pretty close to equal pay pretty easily? So how we feel about the economy, consumer confidence. And then finally, okay, what else affects household spending? Well, besides their capacity to spend, it is the interest rate, okay? Because of course households can borrow to spend. And that's a fairly complete list. Those are the main things that affect household spending, which is consumption, all right? And we can really understand that, how they feel, their capacity to spend, and the price of money because they could borrow to spend. Now, investment, I'm going to come back to this interest rates in just a second, but I just want to get this really quickly. When we think about investment, the number one thing we should think that affects investment is the interest rate. So I wanted to get that there also, okay? Once I put that interest rate, I want to say, hey, that affects household spending, but actually the most sensitive type of spending to interest rates is investment. And that means monetary policy, it affects AD. So many students get confused because as you start to study monetary policy, under the old frameworks, monetary policy would change the money supply, okay, to change the interest rate. And so once kids got, okay, so monetary policy affects money supply, they would begin to think monetary policy affects SRAS. No. There's a big difference between aggregate supply, total production of final goods and services in the economy, and money supply, okay? There's a very big difference. So monetary policy, it affects the interest rate, all right? And the interest rate affects consumption and investment. So that's right, monetary policy shifts the AD curve. Now, what else affects business spending in the economy is business confidence, okay? How they feel about the economy. So their confidence also affects how much they spend. Pretty straightforward. As far as investment, those are the two big ones I want students to know. Government purchases. What affects that? Well, legislation. And what should come to mind right off the bat is fiscal policy. So before I go on, we need to see something. Our two major policies that we have to stabilize the economy are fiscal policy and monetary policy. And they are both demand management policies, okay? This video is not just about those policies, okay? It's about things like changes in wealth and confidence also, okay? Things that aren't those policies. It's about what shifts SRAS and AD in general. But we do have a huge takeaway here, okay? Our two major policies, fiscal and monetary policy, are demand management policies. They shift AD. Next, on the net exports, okay? Honestly, interest rates also do it, okay? I don't always show that one, but interest rates do affect it because interest rates are going to affect the value of the currency. I usually think of that one as just kind of a standalone, or I teach it oftentimes as a standalone, but really it's the interest rates affect the value of the currency, which affect net exports, okay? But value of the currency, it stands alone. So value of the currency appreciates or depreciates. Very quickly, if say we're doing the US economy and the dollar depreciates, well, if the dollar depreciates in international exchange markets, our stuff is priced in dollars. So if the dollar becomes cheaper, our stuff becomes cheaper, exports go up. That means if the dollar depreciates, AD shifts to the right. A lot of kids have a hard time with that one, but it's really straightforward once we understand, hey, the dollar depreciating means the dollar is becoming cheaper in terms of other currencies. Our stuff is priced in dollars. If the dollar depreciates, our stuff just became cheaper. We're going to sell more of our stuff. Exports go up. That's AD again shifting to the right. The other thing I want students to think about, besides the interest rates and the value of the currency, is I want them to think of the national income of trading partners, okay? And there's, again, a lot of ways we could say this, just the national income of other countries, okay? That's all I'm saying, is the national income of other countries, because it's other countries that buy our exports, so this is very important. So what's going on with the national income of other countries? That affects AD. Guys, this is not a list to be memorized. This is something that can be understood. And the key to understanding all of this, guys, is to understand that AD is C plus I plus GP plus NX. I really want students to, when they think of AD, to be thinking of this. AD is an aggregation of all the demanders of goods and services in our economy. When those demanders spend money, we have consumption, investment, government purchases, and net exports. Remember, it's households that are standing behind this one, businesses behind that, government behind that, and the rest of the world behind that. I hope that makes sense to you. That's a fairly complete list of what's going to cause AD to shift, okay? What's going to cause those positive or negative demand shocks. Now, SRAS, okay? This is total production in the short run, but the big thing on the AS part is it's total production. The actor that sits behind this one is businesses, and yes, businesses both produce goods and services, and yes, businesses buy goods and services. They do both. They're on both sides, but this is business in the production of goods and services, okay? Now, when it comes to businesses producing goods and services, they base production off of profitability. So pi sign is for profits. You might not be used to that. They base production off of what's happening to profitability, okay? Now, revenue changes we're mainly going to associate with price level changes, right? Prices are benefits to businesses. Prices reflect the per unit revenue for businesses. So when the price level goes up, we want to think that's revenues going up, okay? So revenues we associate with the price level. When revenues change, when the price level changes, we're going to get movements along the curve, okay? We're going to get movements along the curve. So revenues are going to change how much we produce in the short run when costs are lagging behind the change in the price level, okay? They're going to change that profitability again in the short run because costs are going to lag behind the change in revenue, and we're going to show that change in production by movements along the curve, okay? So when it comes to shifts of the curves, we're focused on changes in cost, okay? Changes in cost, which affect profitability, okay? They're going to cause the curve to shift, okay? Again, revenue changes we associate with price level changes. When the price level changes, when revenue changes and costs lag behind, which is what happens in the short run, we move along the curve, okay? Production does change. It's represented by a movement along the curve. But what we want to focus on in this video are shocks, things that shift the curve, which would be changes in the cost of production. Now, we're doing macroeconomics. We're looking at the economy as a whole. So we want to look at cost that almost every single business has. The two biggest costs, okay, that businesses have are one, wages, okay, and you might hear the term nominal wages, and that's fine, okay. I like to say we live in a nominal world, so if you say wages, that's pretty much synonymous with nominal wages, okay. So wages, that is a big one, okay. In a lot of ways, I like to say that's the number one thing we should associate with causing the SRAS to shift. The next one is energy prices, okay? Now, a lot of books might say something like changes in the prices of commodities, okay? So you see prices of commodities. And that's good, okay? That absolutely works. Commodities, think of that as our raw materials out there, okay? But the biggest commodities that I want students to think about are oil and gas, okay? Our energy prices, okay? So commodities, that would include oil and gas. Yes, it would include things like iron and aluminum, which yes, would shift the curve. So commodity prices do shift it, but the big ones are oil and gas. So I just say energy prices. These are the two big things that are gonna shift the SRAS curve. Now, I do want students to understand that you might see inflationary expectations, okay? Well, how does that work into what I'm saying? The things that shift the curve are cost of production. Inflationary expectations, well, when we talk about inflationary expectations, we're really saying the expectations of workers. That's what we're mainly talking about. So if they expect higher inflation, what are they gonna do? They're gonna agitate for higher wages. So inflationary expectation really just points back to wages. Guys, this is really simple, actually. The big ones that we are going to focus on that shift the SRAS curve, okay? Again, things that are major cost of production that almost every single business faces out there are wages and energy prices. Yes, also inflationary expectations, but inflationary expectations, we're talking about the inflationary expectations of workers. If they think the inflation rate's going to go up, they're going to do what? Agitate for higher wages. Now, before we close out this video, I want to talk about something that's very difficult for a lot of students, okay? A lot of students say, oh, well, wages, don't they also shift AD? Wages, that is a form of income, is it not? And it is. It is a form of income, but that's all it is. It's a type of income. It's not synonymous with the word income. What? Here's the thing, guys. Income, which we have right here, I need a place to write it. I think I'm just going to write it. Let's go right here. So income, income, guys, finish it out, is wages plus rent plus interest plus profit. Okay, wages is just a type of income. Now, if you're lost what I'm saying, okay, wages shift SRAS. A lot of kids think, okay, but don't wages also shift AD because it's a type of income? Here is the flaw, okay? Here's the deal. When wages go up, profits go down, okay? That's going to have to happen. What? Well, let's understand it this way, okay? So we've got revenue minus cost. What's that? Wages plus rent plus interest equals profit. Well, let me kind of move that parenthesis just ever so slightly. When wages go up, profits go down. So wage changes do change the profitability of production, so they absolutely shift the SRAS, because what shifts the SRAS, or what causes us to produce more or less? Well, changes in profitability, okay? So wages do affect the profitability of businesses. We're going to shift the SRAS, but as we just saw, wages cause profits to go down. When wages go up, profits go down, income doesn't change, okay? Now, there is some complexity here when you get to the differences between MPCs of people that get a lot of income from profit versus wages. So in an upper division macro class, okay, we might start getting into how this actually could affect AD because of the differences in MPC. But in a first year economics class, okay, in a first year economics class, when wages change, what we're supposed to understand is that's just a type of income. Profits go down, and total income is not going to change, so do not shift AD. So again, when wages change, shift SRAS, don't shift AD. Anyhow, that's it. Those are the shocks, okay? This is pretty much a complete list. And these things, you don't have to write them down. You can fully understand these things based on the way that we have framed it up, all right? So here's our graph, the ASAD model. What causes this curve to shift? There they are. What causes this curve to shift? There they are. Hope that makes sense to you.